I understand this is difficult, but the legal documents are clear.
Yep.
This is our home. Please, let's just talk about this.
When I opened the front door, I didn't hear silence, I heard drilling. Not faint, not distant, right above my room. I stood there with my suitcase still in my hand dust, floating in the sunlight like it had already replaced me. Someone had decided I didn't live there anymore. If you've ever walked into a place that was supposed to be yours and realized it wasn't, take a second to like this video and subscribe. It helps more people find stories like this, and I want to know where you're watching from. I didn't call out, I didn't ask questions. I just walked forward slowly past the entryway, past the framed photos that hadn't been updated in years, past the living room, where nothing had changed except the air. It felt rearranged, controlled, like everything had already been decided without me. The closer I got to the hallway, the louder it became, Power Tools' voices movement. I turned the corner and stopped. My bedroom door was gone. Not open, gone. In its place, a wide, unfinished frame, edges raw drywall exposed. Inside, 2 workers were measuring the far wall. A crib sat in the center of the room. White. Brand new. Still wrapped at the corners. My dresser was missing, my bed gone. My closet door leaned against the wall like it had been removed hours ago. Oh, my stepmother said behind me, her voice light almost pleasant. You're back earlier than expected. I didn't turn right away. I just looked at the crib, centered, positioned like it belonged, like it had always been there. We're converting this into the nursery, she continued, stepping beside me as if we were discussing paint colors. The baby will need a proper space. I nodded once. Slowly. Of course, I said. My voice didn't shake. It didn't rise. It stayed exactly where it needed to be, calm, measured. She smiled, relieved. Behind us, my father cleared his throat. We were going to talk to you, he said, but his tone didn't match the words. It wasn't a discussion, it was a notification. I glanced at the wall near the window. Fresh pencil marks, measurements. A clipboard resting on the floor. Papers clipped neatly at the top. Signatures visible. I didn't pick it up. I didn't need to. I just looked. Then I looked back at the crib. I said nothing. My father stepped closer, careful with his words, the way he always was when he had already made up his mind. It is just temporary, he said, hands resting in his pockets, as if that made everything reasonable. The baby is coming in 8 weeks. We need the space. I nodded again, still looking into the room. The walls had already been marked for new paint. Soft colors, neutral, safe, nothing that belonged to me. You can stay with your aunt for a while, my stepmother added, brushing a piece of drywall dust from her sleeve, like this was a minor adjustment, like I was a guest they needed to relocate. I turned then, slowly meeting her eyes for the first time since I walked in. She held my gaze for exactly 1 second before looking past me toward the workers, toward the future she had already arranged. I understood. This was not a suggestion, it was a finished plan. My father reached down and picked up the clipboard from the floor, flipping through the pages with quiet confidence. We already signed the remodeling agreement, he said. Everything is scheduled. It would be expensive to stop now. I watched his fingers move across the paper, tapping lightly near the bottom where signatures lined the page. His name, her name, clean, certain. I said nothing. I stepped past them and walked into the room, careful not to get in the workers' way. One of them glanced at me, then back at his measurements. To them, this was just another job, just another house. I moved to the window. It was still the same view of the backyard, the same oak tree that had not changed in years. The only thing missing was everything that had been mine. We packed your things, my stepmother said from behind me. They are in boxes in the garage. Packed. Not stored, not saved. Packed. Like I was already gone. I turned back toward the center of the room and looked at the crib again. White. Perfect. Untouched. It did not belong to me, that much was clear. When do you need me out? I asked. My voice stayed level. My father hesitated for a fraction of a second, then answered, End of the week should be fine. End of the week, 5 days. I nodded once more. That works, I said. And that was the moment everything settled. Not emotionally, not loudly, just quietly somewhere underneath all of it. They had already decided I did not belong there. I simply had not corrected them yet. I did not go to the garage right away. I stayed in the hallway for a moment, listening to the sound of drilling continue behind me, steady and indifferent. It filled the space where my room used to exist. Then I walked past the kitchen, past the polished counter where nothing had been moved, where everything still looked exactly the way it always had when guests came over. Clean, presentable, controlled. My stepmother followed a few steps behind, not close enough to seem confrontational, but not far enough to pretend this was normal. We tried to be efficient about it, she said, her tone careful, almost rehearsed. You have been so busy lately, and we did not want to interrupt your schedule. I stopped at the entrance to the garage and rested my hand on the doorframe for a second before pushing it open. The smell hit first. Cardboard, dust, storage. My life reduced to sealed boxes stacked along the far wall, each one labeled in neat black marker. Clothes? Books? Miscellaneous. No hesitation, no uncertainty, just categories. I stepped inside and walked toward them slowly, reading each label like it might tell me something new. It did not. Everything had been decided already. We kept everything organized, she added from behind me. Nothing is missing. I nodded once without turning around. Good, I said. I crouched down and ran my hand along the edge of one box. The tape was still fresh, not even settled into the cardboard yet. This had not been done days ago. This was recent, planned precisely for the window I was gone. I stood back up and looked toward the far corner of the garage. A smaller box sat apart from the others. Not labeled, not stacked, just placed there slightly out of line. I recognized it immediately. The old wooden box with the worn edges and the faint scratch along the top, my grandmother's, the only thing she ever gave me in person. I walked toward it, ignoring the rest of the boxes, and picked it up carefully. It was lighter than I remembered, but still solid, still mine. We were not sure what that was, my stepmother said, her voice tightening just slightly. So we left it alone. I held the box for a moment without opening it, just feeling the weight of it in my hands. Then I nodded. That was the right decision, I said. Behind me, I could feel her watching, waiting for something. An argument, a reaction. Anything that would confirm the version of this situation she had already built in her mind. I gave her nothing. I turned and walked back toward the door, the box steady in my hands. I will take care of my things, I said calmly. You do not need to worry about it. I stepped back into the house, leaving the garage behind me, leaving the stacked boxes exactly where they were. They thought they had already cleared me out. They thought they had already made space. I understood. They were working with the wrong assumption. I carried the box upstairs even though there was no room left to take it to. The hallway felt narrower than before, like the walls had shifted slightly to accommodate a version of the house that no longer included me. The drilling had stopped for the moment, replaced by low voices and the sound of something being measured again. I walked past the open frame where my door used to be and did not look inside this time. I already knew what was there. Instead, I went to the small guest room at the end of the hall, the one they used when relatives visited for holidays. The bed was still made, neutral sheets, no signs of life. Temporary. I set the wooden box down on the dresser and stood there for a moment, letting the quiet settle around me. This was where they expected me to transition. From permanent to temporary, from resident to visitor. I opened the box slowly. Inside everything was exactly where I had left it years ago. Folded documents. A small envelope, a key that did not belong to any door in the house anymore. I did not touch the papers yet. I just looked at them, remembering the afternoon my grandmother had placed them in my hands at the same kitchen table that was still downstairs. Keep these somewhere safe, she had said, and do not let anyone decide things for you when they have not earned that right. I had nodded back then without fully understanding. I understood now. I closed the box again without taking anything out and rested my hand on the lid for a second longer than necessary. Downstairs, I heard my father's voice, again, lower this time, speaking to someone on the phone. Words like schedule, approval, timeline, everything moving forward, everything already in motion. I stepped back into the hallway and leaned lightly against the wall just enough to listen without being seen. She agreed, he said, his tone confident, controlled. She will be out by the end of the week. I said nothing. I did not move. That was the moment. Not when I saw the crib. Not when I saw the boxes. But when I heard him speak for me like that. Final. Certain. As if my silence had already been interpreted as permission. I straightened and walked back toward the guest room, the decision settling into place without urgency, without emotion. They believed they had time. 5 days. A simple transition. I looked once more at the wooden box resting on the dresser. They were measuring walls, scheduling work, rearranging space. I was calculating something else entirely. I did not wait for them to come to me again. I went downstairs on my own, carrying nothing this time, leaving the wooden box exactly where it was. The kitchen looked the same, sunlight hitting the counter in clean lines, everything in its place. My stepmother stood near the sink scrolling through her phone while my father sat at the table reviewing something on his laptop. They both looked up when I entered, not surprised, just expectant. Like this was the moment I would confirm what they had already decided. I stopped a few feet from the table, keeping enough distance to stay outside their version of control. I will need copies of the remodeling agreement, I said calmly. My father blinked, once caught off guard for a fraction of a second before recovering. Why, he asked, closing the laptop halfway but not fully. Because my name was not on it, I replied. My stepmother let out a small dismissive laugh. Of course it was not, she said. It is not your responsibility. I held her gaze for a moment, then shifted back to my father. Exactly, I said. That is the problem. Silence settled over the room, thin but noticeable. My father leaned back slightly in his chair, studying me, now recalculating. Emma, he said carefully, we are handling this. You do not need to get involved in every detail. I nodded once. I am already involved, I said. It is my room, he exhaled slowly. As if patience was something he was choosing to extend. It was your room, he corrected. We are making a necessary change for the family. Necessary. I let the words sit for a second. Then I glanced toward the hallway where the sound of work had resumed steady and uninterrupted. Then I will need to review everything before the end of the week, I said. My stepmother crossed her arms lightly, her posture shifting from polite to firm. There's nothing to review, she said. Everything has been approved. I looked back at her. Approved by who, I asked. Another pause. This one longer. My father closed the laptop completely this time and placed his hands flat on the table. Emma, he said, his tone lower now, more direct. Do not complicate this. We already discussed your timeline. End of the week. I nodded again, slower this time. I heard you, I said. Then I stepped back, creating space deliberately. I will take care of what I need to take care of. I did not wait for a response. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, past the hallway, past the open frame where my door used to be. The noise followed me, but it no longer mattered. They were still working under the same assumption, that I would leave, that I had no position to question anything. That silence meant agreement. I understood, and I had already decided not to correct them yet. I did not pack anything that night. I left the boxes in the garage exactly where they had been stacked, untouched, labeled in someone else's handwriting. Instead, I went back to the guest room and sat at the edge of the bed, the wooden box in front of me, on the dresser. The house grew quieter as the workers left their tools, carried out one by one, the noise fading, until only the usual sounds remained. Cabinets closing, has, cabinets closing, low voices, the kind of normal that pretends nothing has changed. I opened the box again this time, taking out the folded documents carefully, one layer at a time. The paper felt heavier than it should have. Not physically, structurally, like it carried weight beyond what it showed. I unfolded the first page and laid it flat against the dresser, smoothing the edges with my palm. The header was still clear. Legal language. Names. Dates. I read it once slowly. Then again. Every word exactly where I remembered it. Nothing altered. Nothing missing. My name appeared where it needed to. Not added later, not implied, stated, defined. I exhaled quietly and reached for the envelope beneath it, sliding out the second document. Supporting records. Transfer confirmation. The signature at the bottom was my grandmother's steady, despite the age in her hands at the time. I remembered that afternoon more clearly now. The way she had looked at me across the table, not explaining everything just enough. "You may not need it," she had said. "But if you ever do, you will know when." I sat there for a moment longer, the documents spread out in front of me, the room dim under the soft overhead light. Downstairs, I heard my stepmother laugh at something light and easy, as if the future had already been secured. I gathered the papers again, folding them back along the same lines, precise, controlled, and placed them carefully into the envelope. Then, I reached for my phone. I did not scroll. I did not hesitate. I opened my contacts and selected a number I had not used in years. It rang once, twice. On the third ring, a calm voice answered. "This is Thomas Keene." I sat up slightly, steadying my voice without effort. "This is Emma Carter," I said. "We met a few years ago regarding a property document." A brief pause on the line. Recognition followed. "Yes," he said. "I remember." I glanced at the envelope resting on the dresser. "I believe it is time to review it," I said. Another pause. Not uncertain. Measured. "When would you like to come in?" he asked. I looked toward the door, toward the hallway, toward the space they were already reshaping. "Tomorrow morning," I said. "First available." I ended the call and placed the phone down beside the envelope. I did not feel rushed. I did not feel angry. I simply understood something they did not. They were building forward based on assumption. I was working from fact, and those two things do not end the same way. I left the house early the next morning before anyone else had fully settled into their routines. The air outside was cool, quiet, unchanged. It did not reflect what had already started inside. I did not take any boxes. I did not move anything from the garage. I carried only the envelope. The drive across town was familiar, the same streets I had taken for years without thinking, but this time every turn felt deliberate, measured. By the time I parked outside the office building, I had already gone over every detail twice in my head. Not emotionally, structurally. The building itself was understated. Brick exterior, clean glass doors, the kind of place that does not need to announce what it holds inside. I stepped in, checked in at the front desk, and waited for less than 3 minutes before I was called back. His office had not changed. Same desk, same shelves, same quiet order. Thomas Keene stood as I entered, offering a small nod instead of a handshake. Professional. Direct. "Emma," he said. "It has been a while." I returned the nod and took the seat across from him, placing the envelope on the desk between us without opening it yet. "I believe we need to review this in full," I said. He did not reach for it immediately. Instead, he studied me for a moment as if confirming something unspoken. Then he opened the envelope carefully and laid the documents out in front of him, one page at a time, aligning each edge precisely with the others. Silence filled the room, but it was not empty. It was focused. He read everything once, then again, slower the second time. His finger paused briefly at certain lines, tracing over names, dates, clauses that had not been relevant until now. Finally, he leaned back slightly in his chair and looked up at me. "Nothing has changed," he said. "The deed is still valid. The transfer was completed properly. There are no competing claims." I nodded once. I had expected that. "And occupancy?" I asked. He folded his hands together, resting them lightly on the desk. "Legally," he said, "you are the sole owner of the property. Anyone residing there does so at your discretion." At your discretion. The words settled cleanly. No interpretation required. "Any modifications?" I asked. He gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Without your consent, any structural changes could be challenged, potentially reversed." I looked down at the documents, then back up at him. "And if they have already begun?" I asked. His expression did not change. "Then it would be advisable to address it immediately." I nodded again, slower this time. "Understood," I said. He gathered the papers and slid them back toward me. "Do you intend to?" he asked. I placed my hand on the envelope, steady, certain. "Yes," I said. I stood, thanked him, and walked out with the same calm pace I had entered with. Nothing had changed. That was the point. The difference was, Now I was no longer working from memory. I was working from confirmation, and confirmation carries weight they had not accounted for. I returned just after noon. The house looked the same from the outside, quiet, still unchanged. Inside it was different. The work had resumed, louder this time, more confident. They were moving forward. I stepped through the front door and closed it behind me without making a sound. The hallway carried the echo of tools against wood, the steady rhythm of something being built where something else used to be. I walked toward it, not slowing down, not hesitating. When I reached the open frame, I stopped again. The crib was still there, centered, untouched, but now the walls had been partially painted. Soft gray, clean lines. Someone had already committed to the final version. My stepmother stood near the window, speaking to one of the workers, gesturing lightly, as if she had always owned the space. My father was beside her, reviewing something on his phone. They both turned when they saw me, their expressions shifting briefly before settling back into control. "You are back," he said, as if that had not been expected. I nodded once and stepped into the room, careful with my footing around the tools and materials. "We need to stop this," I said. My voice was calm, not raised, not rushed, just placed. The worker nearest me paused, looking between us. My stepmother let out a small breath through her nose. "Emma," she said, her tone already tightening, "we already went over this." I did not look at her. I reached into my bag and took out the envelope, holding it at my side without opening it yet. "No," I said, "you explained your plan. You did not review the structure." My father frowned slightly, stepping forward, now positioning himself between me and the rest of the room. "What are you talking about?" he asked. I lifted the envelope and placed it on the nearest flat surface, a temporary work table that had been set up where my desk used to be. I opened it carefully and slid the documents out, placing them one by one so they were visible, aligned, clear. No movement in the room. Even the tools seemed to quiet. "This property," I said evenly, "is not under your authority to modify." My stepmother laughed again, sharper this time. "That is not how this works," she said. "We live here." I met her eyes, then steady. "You reside here," I said. "That is different." My father's expression shifted, the confidence thinning just slightly. "Emma," he said slower now, "this is unnecessary." I shook my head once. "It is overdue," I replied. I turned the top document slightly toward him, my name clearly printed where it had always been. "Any construction, any structural changes, any agreement signed without my consent," I continued, "are subject to reversal." The worker stepped back quietly. My stepmother's arms dropped from where they had been crossed. My father did not move. He just stared at the page. I said nothing else. I did not need to. My father did not speak right away. He just stared at the document, his eyes moving across the lines like he was trying to find a version of reality that still worked for him. My stepmother looked between us, her expression tightening, calculating, searching for a way to reposition what had already been exposed. "This is not necessary," she said again, but her voice had lost its earlier certainty. I said nothing. I let the silence do what it needed to do. One of the workers shifted his weight and glanced toward the door, then back at my father, waiting. Everyone was waiting, not for emotion, for direction. My father finally exhaled slowly and straightened his posture, trying to recover control. "Emma," he said, his tone measured, but no longer steady, "we are your family. We live here. We have always lived here." I nodded once. "You have," I said, "because I allowed it." The words landed cleanly. No emphasis, no volume, just fact. My stepmother's face changed then, just slightly, but enough. The confidence drained. Not completely, but enough to reveal what had been underneath it the whole time. Assumption. "We made decisions for the future," she said softer now. "For the baby." I glanced once at the crib still sitting in the center of the room like a placeholder for something they believed they controlled. Then I looked back at her. "You made decisions," I said, "without checking ownership." My father ran a hand across the table where the documents lay, not touching them, just hovering, as if contact might confirm something he did not want confirmed. "So what are you saying?" he asked. I held his gaze. "I am saying this stops," I replied. "Now." The words stayed in the room longer than anything else. One of the workers quietly set his tool down. Another stepped back completely. The momentum that had filled the space all morning dissolved in seconds. My stepmother opened her mouth, then closed it again. No argument followed, no raised voices, just a shift, a clear one. I gathered the documents, slowly folding them back into the envelope with the same precision I had used before. Nothing rushed, nothing uncertain. Then I placed the envelope back into my bag and stepped toward the doorway, pausing just once before leaving the room. "You should have asked the owner," I said. I walked out without waiting for a response, the sound of silence replacing the sound of construction behind me. Down the hallway, past the space that had been mine, past the boxes that had not been moved, I understood something fully for the first time. They had built a plan on assumption. I had ended it with fact. If you have ever been pushed out of a place you knew was yours, comment number 1. If you have ever seen a story like this happen to someone else, comment number 2. And if you never want to be in a situation like this, comment number 3, or share your own thoughts below. Because sometimes the difference between losing everything and keeping it is knowing exactly what belongs to you.